There's a 1920s movie I've been wanting to talk about, and it's probably not the one you think it is. About 6 months ago, I watched the 1928 movie Noah's Ark for a graduate paper I was working on, the same paper I used the covered wagon for. After watching it and thinking about it for a while, I thought there were a lot of points about the 1920s that were represented in it, so I made this video. And since it was coincidentally first released in this month, November in 1928, it seemed like a good time. This video is kind of a review, but also just a bunch of random things about the movie and how it related to society at the time. But whatever this video is, here it is. Noah's Ark might best be known as one of Michael Curtiz's early Hollywood movies. You know, the guy who went on to direct Casablanca, as well as one of my personal favorites, Mildred Pierce. Its production came at a bad time, to say the least. Originally planned out as a silent, the novelty of talkies began to change the industry, so some talking sequences were added in. This makes it one of those awkward movies between silents and talkies called part talkies. Curtiz had wanted to make this movie for a long time, but Warner Brothers kept putting it off, probably assuming it would be a big investment. And the studio was pretty strapped for cash until its gamble on sound films and talkies started to pay off. Noah's Ark did end up being a big investment, costing just over $1 million to make. The movie serves as an obvious biblical allegory, very similar to what Cecil B. DeMille did in The Ten Commandments in 1923. And just like that movie, it was split into two sections, a modern section and a biblical section. Now let's go through the plot. The very beginning of the movie immediately makes it clear that it's going to be an allegory. Through some title cards and short little scenes, God says he won't smite down men anymore. But man continues to be greedy and builds high towers to, quote, make them strong against God's vengeance. Then people worship gold, which is something that is then connected to the modern day, with an image of ancient men fawning over gold transitioning into modern men obsessing over a stock ticker. Then skyscrapers are compared to the Tower of Babel, which has a very negative connotation. Greed, represented by the stock market, causes more sin when a man shoots a stockbroker, who he accuses of ruining his life. The stockbroker is not remorseful, and is only able to think about the stock market even as he's dying. Then we get a montage of various kinds of sin that's running rampant in the modern day. Gambling, sex, parties, and crime. And if you thought that was heavy-handed, it gets even more so. The next scene shows a religious bearded man on a train in France with a bunch of other people. The other people are mostly either arrogantly atheistic or not behaving in a Christian-like manner. And three men are rather stereotypically depicted. A Frenchman's replacement for God is women. A German's replacement is science, and a Russian's replacement is military strength. They laugh at the religious man for being a believer, with the Russian man saying, "If there is a God, why doesn't he show himself?" Shortly afterward, lightning strikes a stretch of train tracks that goes over a bridge, causing it to collapse. The train plunges down to Earth. The survivors include our main characters, the American friends Travis and Al, Marie, a German girl, and Nikolov, the Russian man. Nikolov and Travis get into a fight because they both have a thing for Marie. She likes Travis much more, because Nikolov is clearly lecherous. Then World War I breaks out in 1914. and then we quickly jump to when the US joins the war in 1917. Al, feeling deeply patriotic, joins the military. Shortly afterward, Travis and Marie get married. Travis feels conflicted about his convictions, but ultimately his patriotism overpowers his love for Marie, and he also joins up. While in battle, Travis accidentally kills Al. Meanwhile, Marie has become a dancer in France. Nikolov, now revealed to be a Russian Secret Service agent, sees her entertaining French troops and recognizes her. He threatens to have her arrested as a German spy unless she meets up with him. He catches her trying to avoid him, and then has her arrested. Later, as she's about to be executed, Travis, who's in the firing squad, sees that it's her and saves her. We also see the religious man again, and we find out that he's actually a minister. Then an artillery barrage traps everyone in a collapsed building. The minister then compares the war with the biblical flood. The flood, he says, destroyed a world of lust, and the war was destroying a world of hate, meaning that the war, like the flood, was in a sense wiping the slate clean and resetting the world. Then we go to biblical times, where we see the same cast of actors in new roles. Nikolov is a Syrian king. The minister is Noah. Travis and Al are two of Noah's sons, and Marie is Travis's betrothed. The king's drunken soldiers take the girl to use her as a sacrificial virgin for their pagan god. Japheth, tries to rescue her, but the soldiers blind him with a hot iron, and they make him a slave laborer. Meanwhile, God warns Noah to build an ark to save himself and his family, so they get to work building it. The girl is about to be killed by arrows for the sacrifice when lightning strikes the archer. Then heavy rains and strong winds begin to wreak havoc. The king and his subjects get beaten down by the flood, but Japheth is divinely guided to his beloved, and he saves her. Carrying her, he finds his way to the ark. Then his sight is restored. Going back to the modern day, the trapped group of people are rescued, and they find out that the war is over. Oh, and Nikolov drops dead for apparently no reason. And that's the end of the movie. Noah's Ark had kind of mixed reviews. The flood scenes, of course, were the most memorable for audiences, and the technical accomplishments were praised. The modern-day story, however, was criticized somewhat for being a bit unlikely. The premiere of Noah's Ark at a Broadway theater was a big event. Here's a description of it from the exhibitor's Herald World. 8 sunlight arcs, embracing most of the colors of the spectrum, mounted on the roof of the building on the northwest corner of 51st Street, played a convincing rainbow over an already colorful Broadway, and took turns in concentrating on a captive blimp high over the Winter Garden. The lighter-than-air craft, which appeared to be about 40 feet long, traveled horizontally, then dipped and swayed as it was manipulated by wires from the roof of the theater. But the novelties didn't stop there. Inside the theater, there were additional surprises, as described in the same article. A drop across full stage was lowered, and effect projectors in the wings played clouds and rain across it. Sound machines produced rumbling thunder. Lightning flashed across the proscenium arch, and other contraptions gave birth to sounds calculated to awe the least timid. Clouds of steam rolled upwards to complete the impression, as the deep opening strains of the overture throbbed through the house. And while this doesn't represent most audiences' experience with the movie, there was one interesting account of one viewer's experience with Noah's Ark that I thought would be good to share. He said, "I first saw the Warner Brothers big feature spectacular in a small room. Under such circumstances, the appeal of the picture was intimate. I admired greatly the carefully selected types in the railway sequence. And when the train was wrecked, I was almost terrified because the disaster seemed to take place in my lap. So close was I to the screen in the little projection room. When the great water scenes towards the end were reached, I sat enthralled. When I left the projection room, I thought I had seen the greatest motion picture ever made. But this reviewer also admitted that seeing the movie in a large theater completely changed his opinion, saying, "Under such circumstances, I found a vastly different Noah's Ark. I found a story that bewildered me by its lack of coherency. I could see no connection between Noah's flood and the Great War, which I presume the story was about. I saw sequences that should have had no place in the picture, and others that asked me to believe that absurd things were not absurd." This view was more common. But regardless, the movie did well enough at the box office, grossing $2.3 million, though the hefty $1 million investment cut into profits quite a bit. I don't know about you, but I also think that the comparison of World War I with the flood was a bit far-fetched. That might partly be hindsight talking, since war was not eradicated like the movie suggests. And it seems like it's completely ignoring the other wars that happened right after World War I. The comparison was also not accepted by a lot of other people. One theater owner, for example, noted, "Too many people know that's all bunk, and so appeal to popular sentiment is lost." But also keep in mind that shortly before Noah's Ark was released, the very idealistic Kellogg-Briand Pact was signed. This attempted to outlaw war, at least among the countries who signed it. It might sound ridiculous now, but it was pretty big news at the time. Although I'm not sure how many people actually thought that wars wouldn't happen now that they signed this agreement. I mean, it's a bit more complicated than I just explained, but I guess all the details are for another video. I also found it kind of funny how the movie says that World War I cleansed society in a way, yet it used the modern stock market to symbolize greed. And 1928 saw the huge bull market right before the Wall Street crash. Quite a few people were appalled at the excesses of the 1920s, which was more provocative than any other time in recent memory at that point. So saying that World War I washed away sins is kinda weird. And if World War I had gotten rid of hate, as the minister character said, why was there still so much of it in the 1920s? The KKK got really big then. A lot of people were hateful toward black people, Jews, Asians, immigrants, Catholics, and so on. Not to mention all the hate going on in Europe that was kind of a continuation of the war. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not surprising that a lot of people didn't buy the comparison, especially if they were following the news. Connected to that, there was also a lot of emphasis on religion in 1920s America. A lot of people thought that the immoral younger generation had lost their religion, and as a result, had descended into moral decay. There's obviously a lot more to it than that, and these worries were more than a little exaggerated, but that's a big reason why there were so many big religious movies in the 1920s, like The Ten Commandments in 1923, Ben-Hur in 1925, The King of Kings in 1927, and Noah's Ark in 1928. They were often seen as moral education, much in the same way that, as I mentioned in a previous video, people saw The Covered Wagon as a lesson in Americanism and patriotism. I think that's why they often feel so heavy-handed. They probably wanted to make sure that even the silly flappers could understand, and possibly be swayed. Religion wasn't as dead in 1920s America as a lot of people think, or thought back then. The success of all of those movies I just mentioned is one sign of that. Ben-Hur was one of the most successful silent films of all time, and while it's remembered mostly for the chariot race scene, its subtitle was A Tale of the Christ, so it wasn't trying to hide the religious theme. The Scopes monkey trial of 1925 is often thought of as a popular rejection of evangelicalism, but that wasn't really the reality, and evangelicalism continued pretty strong, as evidenced by the movement led by Sister Aimee Semple McPherson. McPherson combined evangelical Christianity with modern showmanship, which included utilizing radio and other modern means to spread her message. Her popularity continued even after being vocal against teaching evolution in schools during the Scopes trial, and even after a bizarre and very public alleged kidnapping. Her story shows that people in the 1920s could still be receptive to a form of conservative Christianity if it was presented differently, and in a more modern way. And this can also explain the success of these religious movies. They presented religion in the form of a spectacle, with special effects that impressed even the non-religious, even as the movie beat them over the head with its message. I also think Noah's Ark is a great example of a transitional movie leading up to talkies. Like I mentioned before, it was conceived and largely filmed as a silent, but also had some scenes with synchronized dialogue. This awkward combination had some very noticeable problems. First of all, sometimes you have characters talking to each other with sound, then literally a minute later it's silent again with dialogue titles. Other times, when sound was added in after the footage was taken, what you hear is very selective. Like for example, in this scene, we hear the dog bark, but then get dialogue titles for Al immediately afterward. Also, movie writers were just starting to write spoken dialogue, so it's far from polished. Take this line, for example.
It's wonderful how a train wreck brought us together, isn't it, Marie? What?
While most of the actors do their talking scenes well enough, I think, all things considered, I do have a bone to pick with George O'Brien. His delivery is so stilted that it's kind of distracting.
I thought it was agreed when I brought you over here. If there was any heavy thinking to be done, I'd do it.
I'm also not a big fan of his acting in general, to be honest. I'm not sure if that's a hot take or not. To give an example, compare his acting with Dolores Costello's acting in this silent scene. Stiff vocal delivery was pretty common in early talkies, because most movie actors had not been in the theater, and in silent movies, it hadn't really mattered how they delivered their spoken lines, as long as their facial expressions were good. It's also interesting to note the soundtrack, especially at the beginning. I'm currently working on a very long video about the transition to talkies, so it's fresh on my mind. Originally, sound films, ones with a synchronized soundtrack but without spoken dialogue, were meant to just replace the live musical accompaniment at theaters. This pre-packaged accompaniment from a top-tier orchestra would eventually bring high-quality and uniform music to all movie patrons. Things were moving fast, however, and by the time Noah's Ark was in production, spoken dialogue was the new thing. But listening to the soundtrack can kind of give you an idea about what many musical accompanists did in the silent era. There's a mishmash of classical melodies and themes, mixed with other kinds of music, transitioning in and out of each other. A lot of the cue sheets for theater musicians had a suggested selection of the same kinds of classical music melodies for certain moods or actions. Unlike many part talkies, Noah's Ark hasn't been completely forgotten, possibly because of Michael Curtiz's involvement, or because of the legend that multiple people died while filming the famous flood scene. From what I've been able to find, these deaths have never been completely confirmed, but the background of the story has some truth to it. You see, Curtiz could sometimes be a little insane. For these flood scenes, there were two kinds of set pieces, ones with breakaway parts that were safer for the extras, and the normal permanent parts of the set. But Curtiz put the real actors with the permanent parts of the set, and the dummies with the breakaway parts. To make things worse, Curtiz apparently didn't plan to tell the extras what was about to happen when the filming began, in order to get more genuine reactions. With such irresponsible things like that going on, it's not hard to imagine that someone got hit by the heavy props and drowned. And there was a lot of water. People remembered different numbers, but it was somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million gallons. One film historian said that at least one person probably died during this scene. Other unconfirmed accounts say that 3 people died. It's painfully ironic considering how the movie has such a righteous attitude and is so negative toward people who don't have empathy for others. The minister character probably would not have been happy with Curtiz. There are apparently no surviving production documents for that day, and it's unclear if there had ever been any in the first place, or if they had been discarded at some point. What is certain is that there were definitely injuries. Dolores Costello remembered seeing injured people and blood. She herself fainted during the scene. George O'Brien fared worse. He was temporarily blinded by his spirit gum makeup during the chaos, and his 2 big toenails got torn off during the sequence. And in another scene, when a spear is thrown at him, the tip didn't collapse like it should have, and stabbed him in the side. Another anecdote further demonstrates how unhinged Curtiz comes off. According to Jack Warner Jr., who saw the filming of the climactic scenes as a boy, recalled that Curtiz wanted to show a stuntman how he wanted him to fall down some stairs. He didn't like how the man was doing it, so he threw himself down the stairs to demonstrate, and broke his leg in the process. So, for the nerds out there who actually want to know how I used Noah's Ark in my grad paper, I'll summarize it here at the end. It was an environmental history class, and basically I was looking at 1920s movies that depicted human interaction or interpretation of nature in 3 different categories, and one of these was movies that showed floods. I was trying to find any connections between the movie depictions and real-life understanding and debates of floods. The year before Noah's Ark was released, the Mississippi River experienced a devastating flood. Then, only a couple of months before it was released, a hurricane hit Florida, which caused a lake to flood the surrounding area and killed 2,500 people. And while many people might consider floods to be a strictly natural phenomenon, there are also often considerable man-made factors as well. Flood prevention measures such as dikes and levees can backfire badly if done incorrectly, and this was part of the problem. In the 1920s, there was a growing awareness of this unnatural element of floods, as well as other natural disasters. This has also become a big talking point in environmental history scholarship. And interestingly, this trend could be observed in all 3 of the flood movies I looked at: the Johnstown Flood, The Winning of Barbara Worth, and Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark was probably the most interesting depiction to look at for my paper. The other 2 showed human greed being a critical factor in the floods. Irresponsible management by the owners of dams are shown to be mainly responsible for the devastation when the dams burst, with the cloudbursts only being catalysts. Noah's Ark was a bit different because there were no dams, dikes, levees, or anything like that involved. Yet humans are still blamed for the flood, because their sinful nature provoked God into smiting them down again for their greedy ways. So even though it was the outlier, it still stuck with the theme of a flood being more man-made than natural. That's not to say that these movies are saying that floods are completely man-made. Obviously, flooding can still happen without any human involvement. They just emphasize the human factors more, probably because that provides conflict and gives the characters more motivations for their actions. I guess those are all the main points I wanted to cover. The movie itself isn't really all that good, honestly, except for the flood spectacle at the end. But it provides a lot of good talking points both about the time when it was made and the transition to talkies, not to mention the crazy stories about Michael Curtiz. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it was kind of all over the place. It's just a bit of an experiment with a looser style of video, so let me know what you think. Well, that's all for now, all you sheiks and gals out there, but stay tuned for more tales from the Jazz Age.